The north winds howled across the rugged cliffs of Scandinavia, carrying with them the whispers of long-forgotten fjords and the echoes of conquests that had shaped the lands of men and gods alike. From the icy waters of the North Sea to the dense shadowed forests that stretched inland, the Vikings moved with a fearsome purpose, their longships slicing through waves as if the sea itself bowed to their will. But their story, often told in the songs of warriors and the sagas of kings, rarely lingered on the silent figures who accompanied conquest, the women who became unwilling participants in the tides of war. The untold story of the women captured by Vikings is one painted in fear and endurance, desire and despair, and a resilience that history has only recently begun to acknowledge. These women, often wives of defeated warriors, daughters of besieged chieftains, or innocents from far-off villages, found themselves at the heart of a world where survival depended not only on cunning, but on the brutal politics of conquest. The Vikings were not merely marauders, they were builders, explorers, and settlers, but their expansion was never devoid of cruelty. The arrival of longships on the horizon brought more than the promise of trade or tribute. It carried the inevitability of seizure, displacement, and sometimes death. When a village fell, the fates of its inhabitants were decided in moments of decision, and women often bore the heaviest burdens of these choices. Accounts from chronicles and sagas paint harrowing pictures of this world. Some women were taken into the ships as hostages, traded as currency in the delicate negotiations between rival chieftains, or offered as wives to Viking warriors to cement alliances. Others were enslaved, their labor and loyalty extracted to serve in distant homesteads far from the forests of their birth. Yet within this captivity, these women were not merely passive victims. Many navigated the delicate intricacies of a male-dominated society with remarkable resilience, weaving their influence into the very structures that sought to control them. Their names rarely survive in the sagas, but their legacies resonate in the traces of social and familial networks that the Vikings themselves relied upon. The process of capture was often sudden, violent, and terrifying. One moment a woman might be tending to her home, preparing food or weaving, and the next, the distant sound of oars in rhythm, the clash of axes and the scream of the alarm would shatter her world. Families were separated, and communities were uprooted as longships glided silently into harbors under the cover of early morning mists. Warriors descended like shadows, swift and efficient, and the women who could not flee were seized, herded onto ships whose decks reeked of fear and iron. The journey from homeland to captivity was as psychologically harrowing as it was physically punishing. Many women never saw their villages again, and even those who survived found themselves in strange lands where the language, customs, and expectations were alien. Yet amid this brutality, there were moments of adaptation and strategy. Women learned quickly that their survival depended on reading the temperaments of their captors, understanding alliances, and occasionally manipulating the very structures designed to suppress them. Some became concubines or wives, wielding influence over Viking households that could shift the balance of power within a clan. Others worked in the shadows, preserving memories of their homelands, passing down knowledge to children born into captivity, and sometimes plotting return or resistance. Their endurance became a quiet counterpoint to the violence around them, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming force. In the sagas, the stories of these women are often told obliquely, hinted at in lines describing a warrior's household, a chieftain's bride, or the spoils of war. Yet, in piecing together these fragments, a fuller picture emerges, of a society in which women, even when captured, held subtle forms of power. They influenced marriages, inheritance, and diplomacy. They preserved language and cultural practices. They were the bearers of both memory and continuity, shaping the lives of children who might one day inherit lands across the sea or rise to prominence in distant settlements. The history of conquest is incomplete without acknowledging these lives. the quiet yet profound ways in which women shaped the very world that sought to control them. Even as the longships returned to northern harbors, carrying men and women back to distant fjords, the women themselves carried the weight of a journey far heavier than the axes and shields stacked aboard. They returned not just as survivors but as witnesses, as living testimonies to the reach of Viking power and the endurance of human spirit. Their stories, once nearly invisible, are now emerging from the shadows of history, revealing a dimension of Viking life that is as compelling as it is harrowing. And so, as the sun rises over the icy waters of the North Sea, illuminating the rolling hills and dark forests, one begins to understand that the legacy of the Vikings is inseparable from the lives of the women they captured. Their experiences tell us not only about the might of swords, but also about the resilience of the human spirit under the harshest conditions. In the chapters that follow, we will traverse these lives further, exploring the intimate and often painful realities of women living under the shadow of conquest, revealing the complex interplay of fear, adaptation, and agency that history too often overlooks. The longships cut through fog-laden waters, their dragon-headed prows glinting like teeth in the pale dawn. The women, herded onto these vessels, felt the relentless sway of the sea beneath their feet, a motion as unpredictable as the fates that had brought them there. Fear intertwined with the briny air, the cries of the young and the old echoed across the deck, mingling with the chants of the warriors, whose presence was both guardian and threat. Some women clung to remnants of home, a woven shawl, a clay pendant, a lock of hair tied long ago, while others stared blankly at the horizon, trying to summon courage against a future they could scarcely imagine. The journey itself was a test of endurance. The Viking ships were designed for speed and conquest, not comfort. Crowded decks, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the omnipresent threat of violence made the crossing harrowing. Disease spread quickly, and women were often at the mercy of warriors' whims, tasked with menial labor or simply left to suffer in silence. Yet, it was during these crossings that the first seeds of adaptation were planted. Some women learned to read the moods of the crew, offering small gestures of compliance or favor to soften harsh treatment. Others observed in quiet, calculating patience, noting the hierarchy of the ship, the favored warriors, the respected captains. In these small insights, survival began to take shape. Upon reaching distant shores, the landscape itself became a new form of captivity. Villages conquered by the Vikings were reshaped, not only physically but socially. Homes were appropriated, livestock redistributed, and local customs supplanted by the presence of the newcomers. For the women, the challenge of survival extended beyond mere existence. It was a struggle to navigate a society structured entirely around male dominance and conquest. Captured women were often assigned to households, not merely as laborers, but as symbols of victory, trophies of a power that extended across oceans. Within these households, they had to negotiate their position carefully. Defiance could bring punishment or death. Yet submission required a delicate balancing act between personal dignity and the safety of themselves and their families. Marriage, or the semblance of it, became a central strategy for survival. Viking men, pragmatic and opportunistic, frequently married women they had captured, forging new alliances or legitimizing claims over conquered lands. Women who entered these marriages often gained a degree of security and influence otherwise unavailable. They could manage households, oversee servants, and even participate indirectly in decisions affecting trade, property, and local politics. While this might appear as empowerment, it was always constrained by the underlying threat of violence and the ever-present reminder that their status derived from conquest rather than choice. Yet, within these constraints, some women thrived, cultivating networks of loyalty and influence that stretched across kinship and community lines, subtly shaping the culture and decisions of their captors. The sagas, though often focused on the exploits of warriors, occasionally preserve glimpses of these women's lives. One story tells of a woman taken during a raid on a coastal village who, through her wit and intelligence, became an advisor to the Viking chieftain who had claimed her. Her counsel, initially sought to ease the household, eventually influenced decisions on alliances and negotiations with neighboring tribes. Another account speaks of a young bride who preserved the songs, stories, and traditions of her people, teaching them in secret to her children, ensuring that the memory of her homeland persisted even under foreign rule. These narratives, fragmentary though they are, reveal that capture did not extinguish agency. Rather, it transformed it, forcing women to find new avenues for influence and survival in a world dominated by swords and oaths. Yet survival was rarely simple. Emotional and psychological torment accompanied physical hardships. Many women mourned families left behind, villages destroyed, and lives abruptly altered. Some formed bonds with fellow captives, a network of solidarity that offered comfort and counsel, a fragile refuge amidst uncertainty. Others developed complex relationships with their captors, fear mingled with dependence, resentment tempered by necessity. It was a world where trust was scarce, and every gesture could conceal motive. Yet within this precarious balance, women navigated the subtleties of power, shaping outcomes in ways that history often overlooks. The mythology of the Vikings further complicated these realities. Women were simultaneously feared and revered, their roles in both the mortal and divine realms reflecting contradictions inherent in Norse culture. Goddesses such as Freya and Frigg embodied power, cunning, and authority, yet mortal women often faced the starkest vulnerabilities. The sagas suggest that captives were sometimes perceived as carriers of fate or omens, their presence influencing decisions of war and settlement. This interplay between belief and reality shaped treatment, creating a layered experience in which divine narratives and human survival were inseparable. As settlements stabilized and the immediate chaos of conquest receded, the lives of these women became deeply intertwined with Viking society. Some were assimilated fully, becoming mothers, homemakers, and community leaders, influencing generations yet remaining largely invisible in written records. Others remained perpetual outsiders, navigating the tension between their origins and their imposed identities. These lives, lived in the interstices of conquest and continuity, form a hidden tapestry, a narrative that blends the brutality of warfare with the subtle resilience and ingenuity of women who refused to be erased. Even centuries later, the echoes of their experiences can be discerned in archaeological findings, in the patterns of settlement, and in the stories passed down through oral tradition. Burial sites, household artifacts, and occasional rune inscriptions suggest the presence and influence of women who had once been captives, their survival etched into the fabric of Viking life. The convergence of history and myth, violence and endurance, shapes our understanding of the Viking world far more profoundly than the tales of battle alone. These women were witnesses, participants, and sometimes quiet architects of the societies that emerged from the chaos of conquest. And so, as the long ships settled into fjords and the sounds of oars gave way to the hum of daily life, the stories of these women emerged from the shadows, revealing a dimension of Viking history that is as complex as it is harrowing. They endured, adapted, and sometimes thrived, leaving traces of their presence that demand acknowledgement. In the next chapters, we will delve deeper into individual narratives, moments of rebellion, cunning, and influence that illuminate not only the brutality of conquest, but also the indomitable human spirit that persisted within it. The seasons shifted over the Northlands, and with each passing winter, the women who had once been strangers in foreign lands grew accustomed to the rhythms of Viking life. Yet, adaptation did not erase longing, nor did it quell the quiet fires of defiance that simmered beneath the surface. Some women, though outwardly compliant, found ways to assert their will, using intelligence, patience, and cunning as weapons in a world dominated by axes and oaths. Resistance came in many forms, not all violent, but all profoundly courageous. One form of subtle defiance lay in the preservation of identity. Women taught their children the language of their homelands, recounted stories of distant villages, and practiced rituals in secret, keeping alive the memory of the world they had lost. In doing so, they challenged the cultural dominance of their captors, creating a parallel narrative that could endure for generations. The act of remembering, seemingly simple, became a powerful form of resilience, a statement that conquest could take land and liberty, but not the soul. Some women navigated influence within the very households that held them captive. A clever word here, a carefully placed suggestion there, allowed them to shape decisions subtly, whether about marriages, alliances, or property. There are accounts, pieced together from sagas and archaeological evidence, of women mediating disputes between men, advising on the management of estates, and even negotiating the fates of other captives. Such influence was rarely acknowledged in historical records, yet it could alter outcomes as decisively as any battle. Other women took more daring measures, engaging in acts that verged on rebellion. Escape was a perilous prospect, but it was attempted. Some exploited lapses in vigilance during raids, or the chaos of journeys between settlements, slipping away under the cover of darkness, guided by memory and courage. Others plotted more complex strategies, collaborating with allies both within and outside the Viking community. These stories are often hinted at in the sagas, where a woman's cleverness leads to the liberation of herself or others, and though the details are fragmented, the spirit of defiance shines through. The intersection of myth and history provided additional layers to these women's experiences. In Norse belief, fate and prophecy were powerful forces, shaping behavior and expectation. Captives could be seen as omens, their arrival interpreted as signaling victory or warning. Women, aware of these perceptions, sometimes used them to their advantage. A display of composure, a carefully chosen word, or the strategic invocation of a deity could influence decisions in their favor. In this way, the mythology of the North became a tool, a language through which women could navigate power structures not formally theirs. Life in Viking settlements was not uniform, and the experiences of captured women varied widely depending on geography, the disposition of their captors, and the status of their original families. In some cases, women became fully integrated into Viking communities, marrying into families and raising children who would inherit land and status. These women occupied a liminal space, neither entirely native nor fully captive, shaping society through domestic authority, mentorship, and continuity. In other cases, women remained outsiders, enduring marginalization and the constant threat of violence. Yet even here, their resilience manifested in small but significant ways. Gardens tended, stories preserved, alliances formed with neighbors. The psychological toll of captivity cannot be overstated. Separation from loved ones, the trauma of witnessing violence, and the perpetual uncertainty of status weighed heavily. Sagas occasionally hint at despair, mental anguish, and the quiet mourning of women who had lost everything familiar. Yet these narratives also reveal endurance, a capacity to endure hardship while maintaining agency where possible, to negotiate daily survival while retaining inner strength, and to cultivate hope that a life beyond immediate oppression might exist. Through all of this, the Viking world itself was in flux. Conquest brought settlement, trade, and intermarriage, blending cultures and creating communities that were part Scandinavian, part local. Women captured in raids became conduits of this exchange, bringing skills, traditions, and knowledge from their homelands into the new settlements. Textile techniques, culinary practices, oral traditions, and medicinal knowledge often passed through these women, subtly reshaping the cultural landscape. In effect, they were agents of cultural transmission, ensuring that even in captivity, their presence left a lasting imprint. Yet tragedy and hardship remained omnipresent. Not all women survived the journeys or the early years of resettlement. Disease, violence, and harsh labor claimed many, their stories lost to time. The sagas and chronicles preserve glimpses of these fates, reminding us that the narrative of captivity is not solely one of cleverness and endurance, but also of suffering and mortality. Recognizing this duality, strength amid vulnerability, gives depth to our understanding of Viking conquests and the human experiences they encompassed. By examining the lives of these women, we uncover a layer of Viking history often neglected in the dramatic recounting of battles and raids. Conquest was not merely an event of land and power. It was a transformation of society, a restructuring of human relationships, and a confrontation with the resilience of those who had been conquered. Women captured by Vikings were witnesses to these transformations, participants in them, and sometimes shapers of them. Their stories illuminate the social, cultural, and psychological dimensions of Viking life, offering a lens through which to understand the true breadth of their influence and legacy. As winters passed and seasons cycled through the Northlands, these women's experiences intertwined with the myths, laws, and daily rhythms of Viking society. Their endurance became woven into the fabric of settlement and community, creating connections across time and place. In the chapters that follow, we will delve into specific accounts, names, places, and events that bring these stories into sharper relief, highlighting the courage, ingenuity, and subtle power of women whose lives history has too often overlooked. These narratives, drawn from the convergence of history and mythology, promise to reveal not only the brutality of conquest, but also the indomitable spirit that persisted within it, echoing across centuries as a testament to human resilience. The sagas and chronicles, though often fragmented, preserve glimpses of women whose lives became inseparable from the fabric of Viking society. One such figure emerges from the mist of history as a testament to courage and cunning. She was a daughter of a coastal chieftain, seized during a raid that left her village in flames. Her journey across the sea was harrowing, yet she carried within her a resolve as fierce as the northern storms. Upon arrival, she was placed in the household of a prominent Viking warrior, a man whose reputation for both skill and ruthlessness preceded him. Yet she quickly discerned that survival depended not on submission alone, but on understanding the subtle hierarchies and ambitions that governed the household. Through careful observation, she learned which words could influence decisions, which actions would garner favor, and which gestures might temper wrath. Her intelligence became her shield, and her wit a weapon. She mediated disputes among household members, advised on the management of trade goods, and even influenced matters of succession and marriage within the clan. In doing so, she transformed her captivity into a position of agency, shaping outcomes in ways that the sagas imply were critical to the household's prosperity. Elsewhere, another captured woman forged her influence through the preservation of knowledge. Taken from an inland village, she found herself among a settlement where customs and rituals differed sharply from those of her homeland. Recognizing that memory and tradition were forms of power, she began to teach her children, and when possible, the children of her captors, songs, stories, and crafts from her native culture. In this way, she ensured that even in a foreign land, her heritage would survive, carried forward through the next generation. These acts, though subtle, were revolutionary, allowing women to maintain a form of cultural authority even under duress. Not all women sought influence through diplomacy or teaching. Some engaged in more overt forms of resistance, exploiting gaps in vigilance during raids or the chaos of inter-settlement travel. Escapes were perilous, yet some succeeded, guided by knowledge of the terrain, the stars, and the loyalty of allies who had either escaped previously or remained hidden within the forests and villages. Even failed attempts held value, as they revealed the limits of Viking control and the courage of those who resisted. Each story, whether culminating in freedom or recapture, underscores the complexity of female agency in the context of conquest. The interaction between mythology and lived experience also played a subtle but profound role. Women were keenly aware of the Norse understanding of fate, omens, and divine favor. By presenting themselves as composure personified, invoking the power of goddesses such as Freya or Frigg in ritual or council, they could shape perceptions and decisions. The sagas hint at captives whose counsel or warnings were heeded because their words were interpreted as carrying the weight of fate. In this, the spiritual and temporal realms intersected, granting women a form of influence that transcended brute force. These narratives also reveal the spectrum of experiences among captured women. Some became fully integrated into Viking households, marrying, bearing children, and managing estates. Others remained marginalized, enduring laborious tasks, social isolation, and the constant threat of violence. Yet even in marginalization, subtle forms of power persisted, organizing domestic life, forming alliances with other captives, or preserving knowledge and skill sets that were critical to the survival of the household. Their presence, though often unacknowledged, shaped the material and social world of Viking settlements in enduring ways. The legacy of these women extended beyond immediate survival. Archaeological findings, burial sites, household artifacts, textiles suggest that women who had been captured contributed to the economic, cultural, and social development of Viking communities. They transmitted skills, preserved traditions, and maintained networks of kinship and alliance that outlived the turbulence of conquest. Even in death, their presence was marked, whether through grave goods, inscriptions, or ritual observances, reflecting recognition, however muted, of their significance. Yet the harsh realities of Viking life remained ever present. Disease, accidents, and the hardships of labor claimed many lives prematurely. Emotional and psychological struggles weighed heavily as women endured loss, separation from families, and the trauma of violence. These struggles are glimpsed in the saga's fleeting mentions of mourning, resilience, and occasional despair. Recognizing these dimensions is critical. The story of women captured by Vikings is neither solely one of cleverness nor only of suffering. It is a complex interplay of endurance, adaptation, and humanity. Through these lives, we gain a broader understanding of Viking society itself. Conquest was not only a matter of military prowess. It involved the transformation of social structures, the negotiation of power, and the integration of diverse cultures. Women captured during raids were central to this transformation, whether as mothers, mediators, cultural transmitters, or subtle political actors. Their experiences illuminate a dimension of Viking life that extends far beyond the battlefield, revealing a society in which influence and survival often depended on cunning, endurance, and strategic understanding. As the northern lights danced across the winter sky and longships lay moored in quiet fjords, the stories of these women persisted in whispers and memory. They bore witness to conquest, adapted to foreign societies, and in many cases, shaped the very communities that had initially taken them captive. Their lives remind us that history is not solely written by warriors and kings, but also by those who endure, observe, and act from the margins, leaving traces of influence that reverberate across generations. In the chapters that follow, we will explore even more personal accounts, names, families, and extraordinary deeds that bring these narratives into sharper focus. We will examine the interplay of fear, resilience, and ingenuity, revealing how these women navigated a world defined by violence and hierarchy, and how their legacies continue to echo in the archaeological and literary records of the Viking Age. Through these stories, the untold dimensions of Viking conquest come alive, illuminating the enduring strength and subtle power of women who, against all odds, shaped the history of the North. As settlements grew along fjords and rivers, the presence of captured women became increasingly woven into the social, economic, and cultural fabric of Viking society. Their influence extended beyond the walls of individual households, shaping the networks of alliances, trade, and diplomacy that were critical to the survival of both conquerors and the conquered. In many instances, the marriages arranged between captives and Viking men served as more than tools of domestic order. They were deliberate instruments of political strategy. A woman's family lineage could lend legitimacy to claims over territory, cement ties with neighboring clans, or even prevent uprisings in newly subdued regions. Her very existence became a pivot upon which the fragile balance of peace and power turned. The sagas hint at the power these women wielded, often in ways that escaped the notice of chroniclers. A woman of noble origin, once captured, could advise her husband on negotiations with rival clans, tempering aggressive impulses with counsel drawn from experience and insight. She might act as an intermediary between communities, ensuring that messages and gifts reinforced alliances, or quietly manage the redistribution of goods and resources within a settlement, shaping economic stability. These acts, subtle yet profound, demonstrate that influence need not come from the battlefield to be transformative. Life in these settlements demanded resilience and ingenuity. Women learned to navigate multiple languages, understand complex social codes, and anticipate the moods of men whose authority could pivot from generosity to violence in an instant. In their domestic roles, they oversaw food production, textile work, and the care of animals, tasks essential for survival, but also opportunities to assert authority and command respect. The household became both a site of labor and of subtle power, where knowledge, skill, and discretion could shift social dynamics in ways that were nearly invisible to the outsider eye, but profoundly consequential for the community. Yet these lives were not without peril. Disease, poor nutrition, and harsh winters claimed many, and violence remained a constant threat. Captive women had to guard against jealousy, betrayal, and exploitation within the household. The stakes were high. A misstep could cost life, freedom, or the safety of one's children. This perpetual tension honed a form of intelligence that blended social awareness, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience. Those who succeeded were not merely surviving. They were shaping the environment around them, maneuvering within constraints that were as social and cultural as they were physical. In some extraordinary cases, women became central figures in diplomacy and conflict resolution. The sagas describe captives who influenced the outcomes of disputes between Viking clans or between Vikings and neighboring peoples. A well-placed word, a carefully timed appeal, or the mediation of quarrels over property or marriage could prevent bloodshed and preserve stability. Their positions, often precarious, allowed them to act as agents of continuity and cohesion, ensuring that the structures of Viking society endured beyond the immediate violence of conquest. The blending of cultural traditions further illustrates the profound role of these women. Captives brought with them knowledge of agriculture, medicine, weaving, and ritual practices that merged with Scandinavian techniques to create hybrid forms of daily life. Foodways were enriched by recipes and preservation methods learned from distant lands. Textiles incorporated techniques passed down from generations. Healing practices blended the medicinal knowledge of multiple regions. These contributions, though rarely acknowledged in contemporary records, demonstrate that the process of conquest was not merely extractive, it was also transformative, with women as central agents of cultural synthesis. Myth and memory continue to shape these experiences. The belief in divine forces, fate, and prophecy permeated daily life, and women often invoked these traditions to negotiate power. Whether by demonstrating piety, interpreting omens, or referencing goddesses like Freya and Frigg, they could subtly influence decisions in their favor. These strategies reveal a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and belief systems, showing that survival and influence often required mastery not only of practical skills, but of symbolic and spiritual frameworks as well. Despite these forms of resilience and influence, the shadow of trauma lingered. Many women carried the memories of violence, separation from families, and the loss of homeland. Their resilience did not erase sorrow, rather it existed alongside it, shaping identities and informing actions. In some cases, these experiences became sources of wisdom and strength, guiding future generations and enabling communities to navigate the precarious balance of power, alliance, and survival that defined Viking society. Archaeological evidence provides tangible testimony to these lives. Graves containing both Scandinavian and foreign artifacts suggest the integration of captives into Viking households. Textiles, jewelry, and tools bear marks of multiple cultural traditions, reflecting the blending of skills and customs that women brought from their homelands. Even in death, their presence was acknowledged, though often subtly, through the inclusion of items that spoke to heritage, status, and domestic roles. These traces allow historians to reconstruct a fuller picture of daily life, revealing the profound impact that women, often captured and overlooked, had on the material and social culture of the Vikings. By tracing the experiences of these women, we gain insight into the broader mechanisms of Viking conquest, settlement, and social organization. Their stories reveal that the legacy of conquest was not solely measured in territory or treasure, but in the complex interplay of survival, adaptation, and cultural transmission. Captured women were witnesses, participants, and shapers of history, their lives entwined with the destinies of the communities in which they lived. As longships continued to ply the northern waters and settlements solidified along coasts and rivers, the influence of these women extended across generations. Their resilience and agency, often hidden from the grand narratives of kings and warriors, left an indelible mark on the Viking world. In the next chapters, we will explore the personal sagas of extraordinary captives whose intelligence, courage, and adaptability shaped alliances, preserved cultures, and left legacies that ripple through history. These stories illuminate not only the harsh realities of conquest, but also the enduring power of human ingenuity and spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Among the chronicles of Viking history, certain names emerge faintly from the shadows. Women whose courage and intelligence reshaped the very societies that had initially taken them captive. One such figure was a young noblewoman taken from a coastal village during a summer raid. The journey to her new home was arduous. The sea roared beneath the longship's keel, and the cries of the captured mingled with the laughter and songs of warriors. Yet she survived, not only by endurance but through keen observation and strategic thinking. She quickly learned the intricacies of her captor's household, identifying who held real power and which alliances could be leveraged to her advantage. Her survival depended on more than compliance. She understood that influence could be gained through counsel, subtle mediation, and the management of household affairs. When disputes arose between men over plunder, marriages, or territorial claims, she intervened with prudence, diffusing tension and offering practical solutions that enhanced her standing. Over time, her counsel was sought by her captor himself, illustrating how a woman taken by force could quietly reshape decisions within a patriarchal hierarchy. In doing so, she turned the dynamics of captivity into a sphere of subtle authority. Another woman, taken from the forests of inland Scandinavia, navigated her captivity through the preservation and transmission of cultural knowledge. She taught her children songs and stories of her homeland, ensured that traditional crafts and rituals continued in secret, and became a living repository of memory for her people. Her role demonstrates the profound ways in which captives could influence not only their immediate household, but also the broader cultural continuity of Viking society. Through her actions, fragments of lost communities were preserved, and the legacy of distant lands endured across generations, even within the dominion of conquerors. Some women chose more perilous paths, risking escape and rebellion. These endeavors demanded courage, intelligence, and careful planning. One account, pieced together from sagas, tells of a woman who, understanding the rhythms of her captors, seized an opportunity during a winter journey. Guided by the stars and the loyalty of sympathetic allies, she navigated forests, rivers, and coastlines, evading recapture and returning to her people. These stories, though rare, illuminate the indomitable spirit of women whose survival required not only resilience, but audacity. Even unsuccessful attempts at escape reflected a refusal to accept a life defined solely by captivity, signaling agency in a world constrained by violence. Myth and spirituality were often tools in these strategies of survival. Women invoked the favor of goddesses, interpreted omens, or presented themselves as carriers of fate, leveraging the deeply ingrained Norse belief systems to influence decisions. The perception of divine favor or prophetic insight could shift household dynamics, temper aggression, and command attention. Captives who understood these symbolic frameworks could wield influence in ways that transcended physical power, demonstrating a sophisticated integration of strategy, belief, and social awareness. These extraordinary stories underscore the spectrum of experiences among captured women. Some became fully integrated into Viking households, rising to positions of respect, managing estates, and raising children who would inherit both Scandinavian lands and traditions from distant homelands. Others remained marginalized, enduring laborious tasks and social isolation, yet even in marginalization, they exerted subtle forms of power, organizing domestic life, preserving knowledge, and influencing community relations. Their contributions, though often unacknowledged in contemporary records, shaped the economic, social, and cultural landscape of the Viking world. Archaeological findings reinforce these narratives. Graves containing artifacts of mixed cultural origin, textiles, jewelry, tools, indicate the integration of women from distant lands into Scandinavian households. Their skills, knowledge, and traditions influenced local practices, from weaving techniques to culinary habits and even approaches to governance and diplomacy. The convergence of material evidence with sagas and chronicles reveals that conquest was not only a story of violence, but also of transformation, with captured women at its center. Through these lives, we gain a more nuanced understanding of Viking society. Conquest was not merely an exercise of martial prowess, it was a reconfiguration of relationships, social hierarchies, and cultural continuity. Women captured in raids were both witnesses and actors, shaping the communities in which they lived, preserving knowledge, influencing decisions, and ensuring that the legacies of their homelands endured. Their stories illuminate the complexities of survival, the intersections of power and culture, and the resilience required to navigate a world defined by both opportunity and peril. As the sun rose over fjords and forests, casting light on longships moored in quiet harbors, the stories of these women persisted, echoes of courage, cunning, and endurance. They endured the terrors of conquest, adapted to foreign societies, and in many cases shaped the communities around them in ways that left lasting marks. Their narratives remind us that history is not solely forged in the clash of swords, but also in the quiet, determined actions of those who survive, observe, and influence from the margins. In the chapters that follow, we will explore the final legacies of these women, the enduring marks they left on Viking lore, settlement patterns, and cultural practices, and how their stories, though long overlooked, continue to resonate as testimonies of resilience, ingenuity, and the profound human capacity to endure and shape the world against overwhelming odds. As centuries have passed, the echoes of those who lived through the storms of Viking conquest endure, carried not in the clang of swords or the tales of warriors alone, but in the quiet, persistent legacies of women who survived and shaped the world around them. Their stories, once obscured, fragmented, and overlooked, emerge from the mist of history as testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the subtle forms of power that persist even under the shadow of violence. They remind us that conquest was never only about territory or treasure. It was about people, memory, and the enduring threads of culture that survive even in captivity. These women bore witness to the extremes of human behavior, the courage and cunning of warriors, the cruelty of conquest, and the ingenuity and fortitude required to navigate a world not built for their freedom. Yet they also bore influence, shaping households, guiding decisions, preserving traditions, and ensuring that the knowledge, customs, and stories of their homelands endured across generations. In every whispered song, every carefully tended household, and every story passed to children, the legacy of these women lives on, an indelible imprint upon the Viking world. As we reflect on their lives, we see the intricate interplay of survival and agency, fear and adaptation, oppression and resilience. Their experiences compel us to reconsider the grand narratives of conquest, reminding us that history is as much shaped by those who endure in the margins as by those who wield power in the open. The untold story of women captured by Vikings is a story of life navigating the edge of violence, of humanity persisting in adversity, and of cultural bridges forged in the crucible of conflict. Though their names may rarely appear in the annals of history, their influence is woven into the very fabric of the societies they touched, and their stories continue to resonate, inviting us to look closer, to listen more carefully, and to honor the lives that survived, adapted, and shaped a world that sought to contain them. In the enduring light of their courage, we find a reminder that history is never complete without acknowledging those who lived, endured, and shaped it in ways both subtle and profound.